Hello, I am Miss Ann Harriman, and I would like to welcome you to the BAFTA Q&A of the Underground Railroad. Today's session is part of BAFTA's Learning and New Talents program, which aims to inspire industry practitioners and the public through sharing craft insights, championing underrepresented voices, and exploring the key issues facing our industry today. It's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed guests to discuss this extraordinary TV show that I just finished a few hours ago. So I'm very, very fresh. So I will go through as I see the names. Thuso Mbedu, thank you so much. Joel Edgerton, thank you so much for being up at an ungodly hour for this. Aaron Pierre, welcome. Sheila Atim, and of course, Barry Jenkins. Thank you very, very much for all making the time to discuss this. I think I really wanted to start with Barry and to understand the Herculean task of filming for 116 days, whilst trying to be the custodian of a story that seems even more important in this moment we're living through. And again, the world changed in those 116 days globally as well. How on earth did you manage to steady your sails to make sure this project was the project you always wanted it to be?
Thank you for having us, first of all. I think for me, this was such a long held dream of mine that I considered it a privilege and a responsibility. And so I think in a certain ways, the duration or the scale of the project didn't really matter. It was just too important for me to not bring my best every day. And what we were doing was too difficult and too heavy for me not to also create the space within myself and on the set to always have the welfare of the people you see on the screen with me working on this project, to not have that at the forefront as well. You know, when you buy a computer, it has like the storage of the hard drive, and then it has what they call the RAM, the random access memory. And people often skimp on the RAM. You know, they just buy the biggest hard drive. They can save as many MP3s as they want. But the thing that makes the computer go is the RAM. And I just knew on this one, I just had to just boost that random access memory. And you used a word that I really love. You said custodian. And it's interesting. I remember growing up as a kid, I would always think that the custodian was the lowest person on the totem pole, you know, at the place that I went to school or at the building that I worked at. But the definition is a person who has responsibility for or looks after something. And I think referring to me as the custodian of this show, I think is apt because I had to look after it. And then all these beautiful souls I see here, Thuso and Joel and Aaron and Sheila and everyone else, they were the actual thing. They were the actual creation. And just knowing that I wasn't doing it alone, it's what got me through.
Thank you. A lot of people almost, I guess, warned me saying, listen, this word kept coming up, heavy. And that actually wasn't what I felt. You know, violence on screen isn't new to any of us. And what I felt that all of you did is to remind us that everything on screen is very light relative to the reality of those that you're portraying. Now, with that being said, you know, when you knew that this was going to be 10 hours of a universe that many people want to turn their face and pretend didn't exist, what was your vision for how it could be seen by those that really need to see it, above and beyond Amazon and distribution and everything else? What, in terms of Colson's story, was there a point of view that you think could make something relatively hellish accessible so we can never forget what history has gone before us?
I mean, yes and no. You know, I believe in the audience. I have faith in the audience. I think, especially with the way I've had the privilege of making the work that I make, I have extreme faith in the audience. And I also believe too that if the cast, and I knew they would, gave full embodiment to these characters, that this idea of the brutality or the hellishness, it wouldn't be the point. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
would just be in some ways a matter of course. You know, only 1.5 of these episodes take place on the actual plantation. And so I knew because of that, there were 8.5 hours that didn't. And typically
Mm-hmm.
when we watch a show set in this world, we're used to the entirety of it being taking place on the plantation, it being about life on the plantation. And I felt like because of all the life that we were filling in between those places, the first episode and the last, that there would be something on this journey that was revelatory or illuminating for the audience. I think the other element of it too was this idea of show versus tell. I felt like where it was important as a catalyst for the character, for Cora, these acts of hellishness or brutality at the beginning of our story, we would show, and everywhere else, as she got further and further away from that, we would tell. And I think always being aware of what that balance was, I thought, despite the fact that I felt like the images we were creating, as you said in your intro, they are rooted in fact and they can't compare to the fact of what happened. I did feel like the audience, you know, would be willing to go on the journey. I
Thank
trust
you.
the audience.
Thank you. And although they're not here, I have to bring up James Laxton and Nicholas. I hope I'm pronouncing his surname Brittle. For Britell, the most extraordinary cinematography and the score, which I feel is now tattooed into my own soul. And one other cast member that isn't here, who played Homer as well, Chase. I bow down. I don't even. Yeah. Wow. How? So collaboratively, in terms of the cinematography and the score, how did that process work? Because this conversation is about the craft, but also in particular the Homer character, which embodies so much of every aspect of this story. How did you cast that, and what did you want Homer to represent, seeing as he's not here to speak? I'd love to hear your viewpoint, Barry.
Whoa, what did Homer represent? Yeah, shout out to Chase Dillon, shout out to Joel as well. When you're working with a child actor, the person in scene with that actor is often helping you direct their performance. And Joel is a director himself, so I share the credit for Chase's performance with Chase and Joel. There's this guy named Don McManus who's in this movie Vice that Plan B made before we made Underground Railroad. He actually screen tested with Chase. I haven't gotten a chance to shout him out yet. And I wanted a kid who was, 9 going on 90, and that was Chase. He thinks he's the big boss. And then I'm glad you mentioned James and Nick in the run up to this question. Then it was about always trying to understand with the child actor is as much about psychology as it is about craft, about trying to put Chase in situations like a sports analogy, trying to place him in the formations as I'm talking to the UK, trying to place him in formations on the pitch where I know he'll succeed. And so there were some scenes where I told him what the scene was, but not what he would do. The scene where he and Ridgway are standing by the lake having the conversation about the keys, Chase has no prep for that scene. Only Joel has the prep for the scene. And then now that it shows out, at the very, very end, this is how it ties to James, after Cora walks off and gets on the handcart with Molly, that's take one, that Steadicam shot. And I just whispered to James, to whisper to Poss and Steadicam op, I told him, go back. Because Chase doesn't know we're coming back. And so he's just in the scene. And Joel is there and he's crying because he's lost his man. And the camera just like, so shout out to the Steadicam op, because that's not playing. And he just goes back, he goes back. And we come over and all that stuff with Donald Glover, Childish Gambino. I don't know that's going to happen because the moment is unplanned. But I think with Chase, there was always a moment where he was just it. And Joel was so good because Joel, I wouldn't call cut. Joel must have been like, all right, what are we doing? But he's still in it. He's still in it because we had figured out there were moments where Chase just like, he was Homer and we had to be there to get it. So shout out to James and Possum, Steadicam Op and Joel and everybody. It was just with 116 days, you figure out how to do it, man. And there were just moments where we got it. You're
I think
Joel. I'm them kids. You on mute, Joel. You on mute.
Oh.
You're still on mute, Joe.
Can I contribute to that very quickly?
Please, sir.
I'm an Australian and I believe in blowing other people's trumpets or horns. There's something about Barry's early preparation with Chase, which created something I'd never really seen before as intensely, which is a child understanding the parameters of shifting from their own personality into a character. And you would know that if Chase was here on this call, because he is an adult in many ways, and yet he has a very dynamic personality. He loves to joke around. He won't sit still. He's a real entertainer in many ways in social environments. Watching Barry communicate with him, the understanding that in this world of the show, he could not behave with the dynamism that he exists with in our world, that he would be in trouble for talking back to an adult person, for joking around, for looking you even in the eye, he might get in trouble. And watching Chase just sort of put his costume on and understand that shift was all part of that preparation. And it was, if you know the phrase, Sir Ian, thou shalt not pass, that was Chase. It was like Chase Dillon, Homer. And he understood that.
Well, Joe, look, as we have you, I wanted to talk about Ridgway's terror, but not his violence, and ask you, for me at least, and I think many of my friends that have observed Ridgway's character, what was extraordinary about the monster in him wasn't the act of violence. It was more actually his words. If you think just before the extraordinary monologue you have just before you ask Mac to get that whiskey and broke everyone's heart, and the most effective weapon of your voice is the conversation with Cora when she's in the bathroom. How did you release those demons and have them work to deliver this character of yours?
You ask very good questions, by the way. A large part of my consideration of Ridgway, my interest in playing him, and my conversations that swirled around with Barry were around the ideas of psychological violence as opposed to the simplicity of physical violence. And I think, there's a lot of confronting physical violence in the show that gets closer to the heart of physical violence than most television or film does. I think we're very desensitized by certain types of screen violence. But the psychological violence to me is as terrifying. Positions of power held by dangerous people who have platforms, and in this case, a personal platform of holding on to somebody's freedom and having the ability to get inside their head with ideas, whether it's political ideas, schemes of the world, as Ridgway has, or in fact, the knowledge of information that will hurt and really scar somebody. I remember feeling that was one of the most confronting moments for me. I remember Barry, we were talking about beautiful Aaron, who's here, and his eyes. And it became a real thing for Ridgway to talk about this man. I think his ability then at that moment in the bathroom to really, really specifically attack Cora with psychological violence in the description of things that had happened to him. I found very confronting, but a necessity in order to get inside the mind of a person who is slinging arrows in a way. And I think if that makes any sense, slinging arrows that really are going to stick more than physical violence. And that kind of violence, I think, exists in the world we live in today in so many forms. And it's harder to police, but it's easy to administer, and it's not a good way of living in the world. And that, I'm glad you bring that up, because the show has a lot of dark things that swirl around in that world that come from Ridgeway.
And the episodic, the fact that we had 10 episodes and a lot of character development. I wanted to also ask you, Joel, about, in many films, the villain is the villain. In almost we've all been raised on the sort of binary characters. I'm not going to say I felt any sympathy for Ridgeway, but I understood the darkness and what he was carved from. Was that aspect of playing this character that is, let's be honest, not particularly lovable, was that important to put on screen? And I guess Barry and Joel, I love to get your view on this. Someone that we could at least understand where he's coming from.
I think it's very important. Well, it was important for me. I think a lot of audiences like their stories to be, very clear cut. This is the bad guy and this is the good person. I'm really interested in the fact that the world and conversations and the internet are so binary that there's no real ground for understanding in a middle zone. Why I was interested in what Barry and Colson have done with Ridgeway, and particularly these extra scenes or moments that exist in the television episodes, is that we do get an understanding of Ridgeway. And I think it's important that we do ask questions about people who hold extremist views and ask ourselves how they came to those extremist views. If we keep the world binary, then we just stay in a place of I hate, I love, I hate. If you come to a place of understanding, maybe there's a way to learn for the future. How do we raise the next human beings that come up? Why informationally do they, or environmentally do they get to those places? And, yes, we get to a place of understanding with Ridgeway. We don't ask the audience to sympathize with him, but maybe that can help us project things today on people that we see otherwise as just groups, groups of extremists. They're all individuals, and how did they get there?
I think that came through really, really, really strongly. Thuso, as a Nigerian, I'm telling you now, I've got your green passport. I don't want to hear anything about South Africa. We have claimed you. You are one of our own. Listen, I just, before even beginning to talk about how on your first international audition, I think this is what came up. I just wanted to say that I think history will tell you in time what you've achieved in this role. As I said, I just finished episode 10. It is singularly one of the most remarkable performances to carry so much of the story arc as a relatively new actress in the American film-making world is truly, truly extraordinary, and I salute and yield to your throne. So that's just my personal view on it. I had to say that. But how did you take on the weight, if it was a weight for you, and how did you find this time machine that you throw at us that drags us into a world that none of us were alive in completely? I can literally taste the air that you're breathing. How did you do that? And what was your process? Because we're talking about craft, I think a lot of people at BAFTA want to know how you managed to conjure up so much of this performance.
Whew. I think because I also watched it again this weekend, and I watched it with friends of mine, two of which were South African. And the one thing that I really appreciated, I think after watching the first, if not the first two episodes, one of my South African friends was like in complete shock. And the first thing she said was, I didn't know that this is what African Americans went through. And she's lived in America for over 10 years, for more than 10 years. And that's the one thing that I realized upon interacting with the material. And it's something that I think most of South Africa, or, you know, Africa at large, will appreciate or come to understand, is that we think we know, but then when you interact or engage with the material, you realize that you actually have no clue. And so going into this process, it was important for me to come with that understanding that I cannot dictate or I cannot impose my ideas of what I think the story is about. I had to completely open up myself to learning anew from scratch. And it was, Barry had sent me a lot of material to consume, reading material, audio tapes. And it was in the audio tapes that something really stuck out to me. It was in hearing the former enslaved people share their testimony that something in me shifted and went, I actually have no clue at all what it is that I'm about to tell, you know. And in that, and it was one, it's layered in that just hearing them speak brought out these layers for me, in the sense that, one, I am listening to people who are above the age of 75, yet they sound 16. The way that they speak a very broken English, that even when going through the written testimonies with my dialect coach, I couldn't make sense of what was happening, of what was being shared, until I would say it out loud so I could hear it. And it made me understand that the English that they were speaking was not English for conversation, but English for instruction, which is what we don't see in Hollywood movies today. So my perception of the African American body in the 1800s was completely wrong up until that point. I remember I even spoke to Barry about it, and I said, Barry, they don't sound like, you know, what we think they sound. So how do we find that middle ground? And for me, it was really, really important, in as much as we don't want to speak in a way that will require us to have subtitles throughout the story. But I was like, I cannot totally disregard the type of English that they spoke, because it places us in the space that they were in. And also, then I was reminded of a course that I did in university under my physical theater course. Part of the curriculum was voice movement therapy, which is a course that helped us understand and track what the voice holds and the certain traumas that can shape how you sound in your everyday life. And so for me, Cora, who comes up as a girl, all she knows is the life in the plantation. She has her mother, and then one day her mother is not there. And then at some point she is gang raped by a group of men on the plantation, who then go out and start rumors about how she sleeps with animals and she howls to the moon. And so as a result, you know, she would naturally isolate, because now she's been ostracized by her community. And on top of all these other brutal and traumatizing things that just come with the life that she was birthed into, you know. And so for me, it was important to understand or showcase or track how that sounds vocally, because again, Cora hardly ever speaks. So this chaos and turmoil that is internal, what does that look like? What does that sound like when she eventually does open her mouth? And as we see when we get up to episode 8 and episode 9, this whole idea of, have you shared your testimony? You know, so, and sharing that testimony means that she has to open her mouth and speak. So Cora's vocal journey was one that I really sat with my dialect coach. It wasn't just about sounding like a person in the times, but shaping her entire story based on the fact that this is a story of Africans in America and not just African Americans, you know. And so on top of that, it was working through her emotional journey, her physical journey, and her mental journey. But what really pushed me through was Cora's vocal journey more than anything. And on top of that, just understanding her, building her, I took a lot of the stuff that, even if it wasn't on the script, we found in the book, and I carried it over to build the layers of who Cora was. I have a lot of notes, like on my personal notes in building the character, where I would literally put the page number of the book so that I could go back and find that moment, so I understand what it is that I'm doing in that moment in the scene.
Well, it all came through. I think of Nina Simone performances where I'm like, my God, is she giving too much? And that's what I honestly, I'm being honest, and I know that Barry had mental health practitioners and therapists for everyone on set as they needed, which is amazing, and I'm sure you're all doing fine. But from an audience point of view, I felt that there were parts of yourself that were given to us, and hopefully we will be the custodians of that performance. Thank you very, very much, Thuso. Sheila, I have to, you know, with Mabel, with the character, and with mental health, and with postnatal, and all the other traumas that I think are encapsulated within your story. How did you feel, you know, when people finally got to understand what went down, that you wanted to project your Mabel? You know, that how, because having met you and then seeing the performance, I was just like, oh my goodness, she again took it to a place that I didn't recognize Sheila Atim. I recognized this incredibly caring, maternal person that was born in a time where all of those instincts that she has were not needed, or were needed, but she had to find a way to hide them to help others. How did you work your way into this character?
Ooh, yeah. So I read the book at the time at which I was cast. I don't believe the script for that episode was fully finished, was it, Barry? So I was like, cool. I was going to read the book anyway, but I read the book, and very much in the same way in the television series, Mabel is kind of threaded through, but then there is a chapter that kind of explains what happened to her. So that's very much a parallel that's been carried over into the show. And so for me, my process was quite self-contained, in that it's all going to happen in this one episode, and also everything happens in a flashback. So mine and the rest of the world of the present of the show doesn't really cross over. So for me, it was just about, I couldn't really be too focused on what was happening in the rest of the show, if that makes sense, or my impact, or Mabel's impact in the rest of the story. And so for me, I was just focusing on Mabel's relationship with Polly, who is the character who gives birth and loses her child. And the process was really myself and Barry tracking Mabel's journey throughout that episode. So one of the things that Barry said is, you know, Mabel's got cracks, and we have to just track the cracks, particularly when you're shooting slightly out of sequence. So, you know, you're having to go back and shoot something that technically happened before. And because that episode covers quite a long period of time, or at least a lot of story in terms of time in one episode, we had to be very clear about where we were jumping to. And for me, it was just about seeing the strain of everything that she was dealing with, not just herself individually, but also the responsibility that she feels as a midwife. Again, this word custodian keeps coming up, you know, and people who are caring for people who are trying to protect, trying to, you know, look after. And Mabel is certainly a character who's trying to do that. She's trying to be the glue in some respects, for many aspects of life on that plantation. So yeah, it was about trying to see where the cracks were and what it took for those cracks to give, for the whole thing to fall apart. And really that came from the text for me. Usually when I work on anything, that is absolutely where everything has to start. And unless there's a real requirement to, I try and keep my process quite simple. Unless there's a requirement to make it more complex, because I just want to be able to turn up on the day and see what the instincts are. But I did, of course, do my reading. I read into midwifery during that time to understand more about what Cora's position as a midwife on the plantation meant, because it wasn't just she's bringing babies into the world. That also had kind of wider ramifications, in the sense that she's bringing currency essentially onto the plantations, which is a horrible thing to acknowledge, but that's the case. And also to acknowledge midwives' positions on a plantation in terms of status. You know, that was often a complex thing, where because they were custodians of these new births, there was more space. I mean, I don't want to misrepresent it as if they had any, you know, substantial or just freedom in that sense, but they had more space to negotiate within, because they were important, right? And you see her trying to use that space and trying to negotiate that during that episode, but of course it's just not enough. It's never going to be enough in those circumstances. So yeah, those were some of the elements that I had to use to try and realize Mabel. But I think the most important thing, the crux of all of it, is that she's a mother. She's a mother to Cora, and in a sense, you know, a mother to so many people on the plantation, because she's either brought them into the world or helped someone else bring their child into the world, and is trying to keep everyone alive in one sense or another. And so that had to be underpinning everything, that kind of maternal instinct.
And the scene after Moses has, you know, done whatever happened, and you sit down after seeing that. I just wanted to ask, because again, for the BAFTA listeners to try and just embody you on set, you know, was that in terms of preparation, you know, how to physically invoke that, because very little, if anything, was said. It's how did you prepare for that as well? Because it's quite a unique scene to play.
Well, I think for everything, actually, there were lots of times where, I never told Barry this, but I would be like trying to learn my lines and I'd get really tearful just in my hotel room, because the script was so beautiful, so beautifully written and constructed, but also the vision was so clear, not just in the dialogue, but in the description of what's happening in the scene, right? So before I'd even stepped on set, I had a really clear sense of what I thought the vision for this project was. And so for me, once I did step on set, you know, onto these fantastically constructed sets, and I have to give credit to the design team for that, which felt very real. Again, for me, I just wanted to get out of my own way. There's not too much extra that I want to do, because I feel like, for me personally as an actor, the second I start to overthink things, I trip myself up. So I like simple notes and I like simple approaches. And for me, it was just about being really aware of what's come before in the scene.
Yep.
And, you know, it also helps that I really got on with the actor who played Polly, Abigail. So it was an emotional scene, because it's just that's what you're walking into. It felt so real.
Yep.
That there wasn't, you know, too much in terms of trying to pull things out of myself that were artificial. You know, I just had to allow things to come through. And I think that the really important aspect of that when it comes to the atmosphere on set is setting a tone where that is able to happen. You know, and it wasn't ever heavy on set, in the sense that things were difficult, but for me anyway, but there was always the knowledge that there would be some levity or breathing space if that was required, and that was something that Barry was really great at doing. but yeah, you know, creating a focused atmosphere where people feel safe, they feel comfortable, and they feel able to allow that vulnerability to come through is also a big part of it. So I can't take all of the credit for being able to get to that performance. There's a lot of other elements as well. But yeah, for me, it's always just simple, trying to get out my own way.
Well, it worked. Thank you, Sheila. Aaron, the gift and curse of an unshackled mind. I feel that Caesar's character, in many ways, was one of the easier characters for modern man, if you like, to feel an immediate affinity to, and you know, sometimes not knowing the hell that you're in, maybe seemingly is less painful, and your character was so educated within the means that were availed to him, that I wanted to talk to you about how, you know, what that meant for you, because, you know, from what I understand, Caesar knew the injustice inherently much more than many others. How did you go about that, and how does that reflect to today, where education or lack of education is seemingly the root cause of so much of the misunderstanding that we all have?
Yeah, there's a saying that I never really understood as a child, which is ignorance is bliss. Really recently, sort of as I entered adulthood, I began to realize that what that saying is essentially trying to say is it's easier not to know. It can be easier not to know. And in Caesar's particular case, you know, this is a man who was born in Virginia and spent a large portion of his life in Virginia. He was promised manumission. Of course, that didn't come to fruition, and he was then sold down south, where the audience first meet him. But I think in Virginia, I think that's where he saw glimpses of what true liberty and freedom looked like when it was being experienced. And I don't imagine that would ever leave somebody. I don't imagine anybody would ever see what true liberty and freedom looks like, and that would ever leave them. So I feel like when he is in Georgia and he is on this plantation and he is surrounded by horrific circumstances at all hours of the day, surrounded by trauma, surrounded by people denied their human rights, that is going to aggravate not only your mental space and your emotional space, but your spiritual space. So I was very nervous to access that with Caesar. And I have to give credit to, of course, Barry, for providing an environment where we could have discussion. And more importantly, I think providing an environment where we all felt very safe and supported. And we knew that our well-being was at the forefront of his mind at all times. And also everybody I had around me, you know, the cast, we all felt supported and held, and we held one another throughout this whole process. But yeah, it was very challenging at times, but at many times, all the time. But you know, thanks to everybody that we had on the team, it was made that more doable, because we all had the same objective, which was to tell this story as truthfully and as authentically as possible, to honor those who really experienced this against their will.
And the quandary, the moral question, I guess, for Caesar's character, when really you're offered a halfway out, and realizing the poisoning and the fact that you would be hurting your own people, having the character that so many of us would see as almost like a hero, and then seeing him put in this position, for you, like being Caesar, embodying Caesar, what do you think he would have, in that world, felt with the mind that he had, the freer mind that he had? given that opportunity? It's a crazy question, but I wanted to ask Caesar, i.e. you, that question.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I have to say, all of my feelings towards Caesar, the character that is Caesar, you know, that originated in this novel and that Barry brought beautifully to life in this series, I just have an incredible admiration and respect for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly believe that although, of course, he has the human instinct of preservation, I truly believe that he has such a love for his community and those that look like him and have experienced what he's experienced,
Mm-hmm.
that he would always do what was best for those around him, as opposed to just solely for his sole gain and purpose.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. I think we've reached a point where we're in the Q&A stage, and there's some interesting questions, and I have to really start with somebody that is calling you King Barry. Barry. So this is from Patrick Hopkins, and he's like, a question for King Barry. So King Barry, did you find yourself feeling totally overwhelmed by what you were doing? If not, how? And if so, how did you work through it to achieve what you were able to achieve? And thank you all. That's from Patrick Hopkins. Oh, you're on mute, brother.
I was messing with Joel. It was overwhelming in the beginning, but then once you start doing it, you kind of just start doing it. I mean, you know, listening to Sheila talk about performing as Mabel, that's maybe 6 days of work, you know, we just had to get it in. And so at a certain point, you can't even, you can be overwhelmed, but you can't allow yourself to function in an overwhelmed state. So, so now you kind of just like, one, I think you have to realize it's not your sole responsibility. I think that was the biggest key to getting this done. Understanding it's not your sole responsibility, and then trusting people. You know, the penultimate episode ends, you know, on a shot filmed by the Steadicam operator that no one has any anticipation is going to happen, including Joel and Chase. But the machine, the muscle was just so in practice, you know, that I could ask for those leaps, you know, and this is the thing about being a king. I kind of don't like that word. I'm not coming for you necessarily, but I kind of don't like that word. It's interesting because, and part of this is somebody asked about the Amazon reviews of woke fantasy. I remember being a kid and people, Michael Jackson had the Remember the Time video. And everybody was like, oh, we weren't slaves, we were kings and queens. It's like, were we? I mean, because think about it, kings and queens have subjects, and in that word, the subjugation, you know, I would much rather be the descendant of blacksmiths and midwives, as Sheila so clearly put it. So I don't want to be a king. A king is above the people. I want to be amongst them. And I think being amongst this cast and crew, it was the only way this overwhelming thing was achievable. So I am not King Barry, man. I'm just the dude who worked.
You heard that, Patrick.
But yeah, man, it was because it was such a collective effort, you know, that was why we were able to achieve it.
Thank you. And from Afia and Kruma about the music, and that's something we haven't touched upon, you know, that there was obviously contemporary music, which for a lot of people was respite, because it's a reminder that, you know, life went on, right?
But that was it exactly. You know, I knew we didn't want needle drops in the middle of the episodes. I kind of wanted to, I don't know, with this story at least, I felt like having needle drops within the episodes would be almost too jarring, that it felt like that was out of place, especially in a time when we don't even have the ability to record music, so to speak. So I didn't want needle drops, but I did feel like at the end of episodes, one exactly is to remind yourself, you know, that this thing is in the past and we are here. There's almost this like disassociative sort of communion that happens when you realize, oh shit, Donald Glover, he's right now. So clearly, boom, 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 this thing is there and I'm here. But the biggest thing was at the end of that first Indiana episode, when Cora leaves Caesar in her dream and then walks out of Royal's cabin, I just heard groove theory, man. And I was like, how am I hearing this song from my high school years when I'm watching this formerly enslaved woman? It's like, oh, her heartbreak is the same as Lemuel LaRue's heartbreak. Yeah. Somehow we're connected, you know, through space and time. And so that was the first one where I realized, oh, we got to put that at the end. And then it became a game. You know, you were talking about how Joel gets to run his damn mouth. Oh my God. Bro, you have more lines than anybody else in this show. You were just preaching and preaching and preaching. And I went to public school and I read them books and they preach and they preach and they preach. I filmed this on Stone Mountain, Georgia, and there's an etching of Confederate soldiers and they preach and they preach and they preach. And then here's Donald Glover and he has the final say, "This is America." And so it was really fun, you know, finding this. It wasn't like a game because it was serious, but it was really fun to find out, okay, here is something, I don't know, here, we are the descendants of these people, and now we get to voice ourselves, you know, and here's how our voice aligns with the struggle that they went through. So yeah, the songs it was like Aaron mentioned, levity. It was a bit of levity in making the show.
It was dope. I think everyone appreciated it. I have in full caps from an anonymous attendee saying, "Could you please talk about the audition process?"
Oh, shit, I guess I'll start. You know, I have an open door policy when it comes to casting. You know, if you show me you're the character, the role is yours. It's a meritocracy. And because there's so many characters in the show, it's not a typical TV show where all 10 episodes are amongst the same characters. Cora moves on and there's a whole new troupe that she gets to interact with. So it took a lot of people to fill out the cast list. There's actually one guy who plays two characters in this show. It's a little bit of an Easter egg. Thuso, do you know who I'm talking about? So in The Great Spirit, the same guy that Fred walks into at the bar and he's like manifest destiny and then they go out and he hands him the baby. That's the same guy who chases you in the vineyard when you're running down the vines and Royal catches you and tells you, you're like, he pointed at me. It's the same guy because we just ran out of actors. And so I was like, bro, I don't think we'll see you. Can you come back and do this other part? It's the same actor. But it's a meritocracy, man. And the only two who I knew were Joel, I kind of had Joel picked out, but I went to see Andre Holland play Othello at the Globe, and Sheila and Aaron were both in that play, and they just stuck out in my head. I thought, those two, something about those two. And then I still made them tape because they had to do it. But hey, if you put it on tape, man, hey, it's a meritocracy, bro. You know what I'm saying? You might have been at Edgerton last season, but can you do it this season? You know what I'm saying?
Thuso said on an interview, I think, that she hadn't even, you know, nailed the accent by the time she did the first audition. What I mean, again, you must have taken a real leap of faith in terms of understanding that it was
well, and let me say, because this is what she hasn't said in the press. So the first tape came in and then I met with her and then she must have got a dialect coach or something, because when she came back in, I was like, the accent doesn't sound as good. What's going on? She had got inside her head too bit. But thankfully, I could see that it wasn't about that. You know, it wasn't about that. Who the character was, that part she had nailed.
Thuso, are you in full agreement there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
I have a question for everyone now. What new understanding of this world that we've seen portrayed on screens, large and small, before did being part of this amazing project bring you?
Yeah, I'll go last because I've talked about this quite a bit in the press. So I'd be curious to see what these folks have to say. Or I'll go first because I see the faces. Everybody's trying to figure out how to answer the question. I mean, the biggest thing for me was when I had seen 116, not even 116 days, 116 days, 500 pages. That's a lot of excavation, interrogation, empathizing. It's just a lot. It's a lot to do with any group of characters, but especially this group of characters. And I think in doing that, you know, again, this word slavery or enslaved, all these words, they're very big words. And they're so big that when you hear them, you see things automatically, you see things inherently. And I think making this project, it got me inside those words, in the space between the letters. You know, sometimes you look at a definition of something and there's one definition. Then if you keep going, there's 8 definitions, you know, 8 different ways of interpreting that word. I think I'll speak of me, I'd grown accustomed to contextualizing my ancestors through the prism of that word in a very simple, flat way. And I think making the show, it just filled in so many textures, so many nuances, and who they were and what they did, most importantly. I don't think I had that relationship before. And that's me personally as making it. You know, I don't know what to say to someone who engages it, who watches it as an audience member.
Thanks. Do you all want to chime in on Barry's viewpoint?
I'll just jump off the back of Barry's because he kind of said what I wanted to say, so it's like an easy segue. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was twofold really, as a kind of, don't know, just as an audience member, I guess it was to see that this story or stories around slavery and set in this time could be told in lots of different ways. And I think I felt that from the book anyway. When I read the book, I remember thinking, I've never read anything like this in its style and in the way it handled the topic was just, I still can't really put my finger on what it is about it, but it just really stuck out as something kind of different and extraordinary to me. And so I feel like the TV show is of course an extension of that. And as Barry said, I think it talks in a very multifaceted way about the topic. It's not just what we've seen before, and it's not just doing the easy thing. I actually think it's harder to really try and dig deep and weed out all of those layers, to try and, you know, challenge people's the well-formed images and ideas that people already have. And then as an actor, separate to that, for me, it was my first time working in the US, and I was aware of the nature of the project that I would be stepping onto. And I was just so pleasantly surprised and heartened to work on a project that had that much heart, that much duty of care to the people working on the project as well. And that much kind of community spirit towards really trying to tell this story in the way that people felt was right, or people felt was actually going to challenge, or people felt was going to just create something extraordinary. So for me, it was twofold. As an actor, I'd never worked on a project like that, and it was.
Can I just piggyback what Sheila's saying? Because you just reminded me, I think your last day was that breastfeeding scene, the nursing scene. And it was just to walk out of that small room and walk by the crew and just realize everyone was just, because one, I don't know how many men in particular, but I don't know how many people in general get to witness that sort of exchange of knowledge. There's one woman showing this other woman how to use her body to nurture another being's body. And then within this context, we assume that whatever this practice was, because to a certain degree, this is breeding, that it would just be harsh, it would be cold. And yet the warmth with which Mabel is teaching Polly, and the fulfillment Polly gets out of realizing that her body is nurturing this other body, it's just layer upon layer. We were all like, this is extraordinary. Extraordinary because it's so delicate and so intimate. And then when you add to that the fact that these bodies are going to be taken away. And yet, how do we think of Black mothers and Black fathers in at least American society? We think of them in very negative, almost pejorative terms: the fractured, the broken Black family, the lack of nurturing, the lack of boo. And then we have this moment where it's like, even in this horrific, brutal system, all these women are trying to do is figure out how to nurture. There was just something so precious about even just within that very, very simple scene. Because the question was, what did you see in this that you hadn't seen before? I was like, that, wholly that. Because I mean, I've never done anything remotely like that. And Sheila, I don't know how y'all did it. That was one of those moments where I'm on set and I'm like, I'm kind of in control, but I have nothing to do with this almost. I'm just trying to capture what is happening. And this really beautiful thing blossomed out of it. And that's a heavy episode. To use your word at the top, Miss On, it's a heavy episode.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God. Just the, man, when y'all do the bury, my man gets down, puts his head on the soil, and you can hear every mic. You can hear him inhale the earth. It's like, this is what it was, because these things happen. The other shit happened, yes, but we just forgot that these things happened. These things happen. And if there's warmth and sort of beauty and spirit that we feel in ourselves, that shit didn't just manifest out of the ether. It was always there. Generational trauma, generational fortitude, generational joy, generational spirit, generational love, generational essence. We have to speak to the one thing, generational trauma, yes, but we got to compound it, combat it, correct it, aggrieve it, address it, beat the shit out of it with these other generational elements that we don't give our ancestors credit for. I'm sorry, man, I went off on a tangent, bro. But every time I look at her face, because you basically played my mom in the show, man. So every time I look at your face, man, it's just hard for me, man. It's hard for me.
I'm sorry, I'll turn my camera off next time.
No, this is what we want. This is what we need.
Because every time we do a Q&A, I'm gonna at least one time go on this tangent because, oh my God. Yeah. You did a good job, Sheila. You did a good job.
Thanks, so did you.
I think that he's happy with you, Sheila. I think.
I hope so. It's too late now if he's not.
Well, speaking of spirituality, it's, you know, I know you don't, you know, I've had some really technical answers from Thuso and Aaron and Sheila, particularly about how they went about this. But I sometimes wonder if we look at the spiritual side and see the whispers of our ancestors. And I don't just mean African-American slaves. I mean the Ridgeways as well. Whether you know, the Ridgeways that really existed are whispering through Joel as well. So we know how bad it was, you know, and you know, maybe you are vessels for that, because you're all really deep into this. But if you take a bird's eye view of the collective piece of work, it's invoking something that's a little bigger than just a nice 10 episode show. So I just wanted to applaud all of you for that. And I'm still marinating in it as best as I can.
Continue to marinate, bro. Continue to marinate, man.
In terms of one word, to one word to what this experience means for you, what would it be? One word.
To me, it's life, you know? Again, we keep talking about how heavy the show, how brutal it is, and that's synonymous with death, you know? I just think so much about life when it comes to the show, you know? I think that's really what it's about for me. Yeah.
Life.
Yeah, just life, right?
Yeah, thank you. Joel?
Humanity.
Humanity.
Lock it in.
These notes. Yeah, humanity. Life, humanity. Aaron, I see your head turning.
Aaron's a very deep thinker, but you might have to come back to him.
Give me 5, son. Give me 5.
No, I need one. You got one.
I'll go testimony.
Testimony. Oh my Lord.
Truth.
Sorry, what do you say, Aaron?
Truth.
Truth. No pressure, Sheila.
Well, I was gonna say people, but then Joel said humanity, so now it sounds a bit like weak, but I have to say people in terms of the show, the product, but also the process for me. You know, just like I said, I've never worked on anything at that time that was so people driven as opposed to product driven. So yeah, people.
Thank you all. Thank you all. I think we are out of time, and I wanted to just celebrate the release as with this conversation, and I hope the BAFTA listeners have taken the time to take in the 10 episodes. And if you haven't, please, the purpose and importance of this piece of art couldn't be more than in this moment. So I wanted to thank all of you, and Barry in particular, for being brave enough to swing that bat to make sure this got made, to make sure the resources that availed to you. You didn't go and do Fast and Furious 48. You decided to do something that matters. So
I will say, if the Amazon and the IMDb reviews, the user reviews keep going the way they are, maybe I will be doing Fast and Furious.
No. I'm logging on right now. I'm writing something biblical. Oh my gosh. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, bro.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Be safe, man. Be safe.